The carriage stopped at the end of a gravel drive, and Seline Voss stepped out before the driver could offer his hand. She had learned, somewhere in the 23 years of her life, that waiting for help was a form of hoping. She had given up hoping 2 weeks before the wedding. The house stood at the edge of a low hill in western Massachusetts. 3 stories of gray fieldstone with dark windows and a front door that needed paint. It was not a castle. No one in their right mind would call it a castle. But it was large enough to feel like an accusation. All that space, all that silence, and her name now attached to it by a document she had signed in her father's study, while her mother pressed a handkerchief to her eyes. The housekeeper, Mrs. Fenwick. Not the Mrs. Fenwick from the list, a different one, older, with a limp that favored her left side, met Seline at the door and said nothing about the state of the front hall. She simply stood aside and let Seline see it herself. The floor was clean. That much was true. But the curtains were gray with dust at the hems. The flower stand in the corner held a vase of dried stems, and the air smelled like a room that had been closed for a season and then opened without apology. Seline looked at it the way she had looked at the marriage contract. She took inventory. "How many staff?" she asked. "3, said Mrs. Fenwick. "Myself. Hattie in the kitchen. Jonas for the grounds." Seline looked at the staircase. It was a wide staircase, the kind that cost money to build and more money to maintain. The banister was good wood, but someone had let it dry out. She would need oil. She would need to find where the oil was kept, or whether it existed at all in this house. "And Mr. Aldrin?" she asked. Her husband's name sat awkwardly in her mouth, like a word in a language she had studied but never spoken aloud. "He left yesterday morning," said Mrs. Fenwick. "He asked that you be made comfortable." Seline said nothing to that. She picked up her own bag. She had not waited for the driver to do it, and carried it up the stairs. Her father had explained the arrangement plainly, which she had appreciated, even if the plainness of it had made the kitchen go quiet for a full minute after he spoke. Theodore Voss. Her Theodore Voss, not the one in the list. Her father had made and lost 2 fortunes by the time Seline was 18. By the time she was 22, he had made a third and was in the process of losing it to a man named Garrett Aldrin, who held a note on the family's textile mill and had no particular reason to extend it. Except that he had a son. The son was named Webb Aldrin. He was 34, had been married once before, and his wife had died of fever 3 winters ago. He had not remarried. He had not, by all accounts, done much of anything since then, except manage the estate and avoid company and let the house go gray at the edges. "He is a decent man," her father had said. "He asked nothing beyond what is reasonable." Seline had not asked what reasonable meant. She had looked at the contract and thought, this is a transaction. Transactions can be navigated. She was good with numbers. She had been good with numbers since she was 9 years old and caught the bookkeeper skimming her father's accounts by 2% over 14 months. She had not said anything then. She had simply shown the ledger to her father and pointed. The mill had been saved. The bookkeeper had been replaced. And Seline had understood, for the first time, that competence was a kind of currency, even if no one called it that. So she married Webb Aldrin on a Tuesday in April, in a ceremony that lasted 22 minutes. And he shook her hand at the church door. Shook it, like a business partner. And walked to his own carriage, and the driver of her carriage had looked at his shoes rather than at her face. She had looked at the church spire. She had thought, transaction. Then she had gotten in the carriage and come here. The accounts were in the study, 3rd door on the left, in a cabinet that was not locked. Seline found them on her 2nd day. She had spent the first day walking the house room by room, the way you would walk a property before purchase. She counted windows. 22. She noted the roof of the east wing, which sagged in a way that would mean water damage by autumn if it was not addressed. She found the kitchen garden overgrown but not dead. There was still structure there, still good soil. Someone had once cared about it, and she stood at the edge of it for a long time with Jonas, who was 60 and had been on the property for 30 years. "Was it always like this?" she asked. "No, ma'am," he said. "Not always." He did not say more. She did not press. On the 2nd day she opened the cabinet in the study. The accounts went back 11 years. For the first 4 they were meticulous. Tight columns, clear entries, every expenditure dated and categorized. Seline could see the hand of someone who had cared, who had taken pride in the order of things. The writing was finer in those years, lighter. There were small notes in the margins. Replace south fence, spring, check the Apple stores, November, that had the quality of a person talking to themselves, planning ahead, alive in the work. Then, in the 5th year, the handwriting changed. Not dramatically, just heavier, slower. The entries grew shorter. The margin notes disappeared, and then, 6 months into that 5th year, the handwriting stopped altogether, replaced by a different hand, bolder, sloppier, indifferent. Seline sat with this for a long time. The 5th year was 3 years ago. The year Webb Aldrin's wife had died. She turned to the most recent entries. The new hand belonged, she established over the next 2 hours, to a management firm called Hardcastle and Pryor, which had been collecting a fee of 12% of the estate's annual rental income, since Webb had apparently signed over property management sometime after the funeral. 12% was not unusual, but Hardcastle and Pryor had also been billing separately for maintenance that Jonas told her, when she asked carefully, had never been performed. The east fence, she said. When was it last repaired? Jonas scratched his chin. Hasn't been, ma'am. Not in 3 years. The invoice said otherwise. The invoice said the east fence had been repaired twice. Seline set down her pen and looked at the window. Outside, the kitchen garden sat in the April light, half wild, salvageable, if someone would just begin. She picked the pen back up. She wrote to Webb Aldrin that evening. Not about the accounts, not yet. She had learned, from watching her father, that you did not lead with the accusation. You led with the question. You gave the other party the chance to explain, and if their explanation was honest, you adjusted. If it was not, you already had the documentation. Mr. Aldrin, I have been reviewing the household accounts as part of getting my bearings here. I have some questions about the arrangement with Hardcastle and Pryor that I would like to understand better. When you have a moment, I would welcome correspondence. Yours, Seline Aldrin. She addressed it to his Boston office. His mother had mentioned, at the wedding breakfast that Seline had attended, and Webb had not, that he kept an office in the city. Mrs. Aldrin, his mother, not a character from the list, a woman with a rigid posture and kind eyes that she kept carefully controlled, had pressed Seline's hand and said, "He is not unkind. He is only lost." Seline had said, "I understand." She had. Not entirely, but she was beginning to. The letter came back 12 days later. Not a reply. Webb's handwriting was not in it. It was a letter from a man named Pryor, of Hardcastle and Pryor, who wrote in a tone that was formally polite and quietly threatening, informing Mrs. Aldrin that the firm had been engaged by Mr. Aldrin himself and that any inquiries regarding the management of the estate should be directed through him. Seline read it twice, then she put it in the cabinet with the accounts. She wrote back to Pryor. She asked for the original contract authorizing the management arrangement. She asked for itemized receipts for all maintenance work billed in the past 3 years. She asked in a tone that was also formally polite, and also quiet, and also not a request that could be easily ignored without looking like something was being hidden. While she waited, she planted the kitchen garden. She had not expected to enjoy it. She was not, she thought, a person who gardened. But Jonas showed her where the seed stores were, old stocks, but viable. And she found that there was something in the kneeling down of it, in the putting her hands into the dirt of it, that organized her thoughts. She would work a row and a question would answer itself. She would pull a weed and a number that had been bothering her would settle into its right place. Hattie started bringing her coffee in the garden at 7 each morning. Seline did not ask her to. It was simply there one day, on the stone wall, and then it was there every day. She also began to fix things. The curtains in the front hall. She took down herself and beat out on the back fence, which alarmed Jonas, and impressed Hattie, and then she rehung them, and they were the same curtains, but they let in light differently. She found oil in the cellar, 3 tins of it, untouched, and she oiled the banister and the front door and the hinges of the east wing, which had been groaning. She could not fix the roof herself, but she found a roofer in the nearest town, and she negotiated with him in a way that felt like a small satisfaction, and the east wing stopped holding its breath against the weather. She wrote a list of every repair that had been billed by Hardcastle and Pryor, and never performed. By the time it was finished, the list ran to 23 items. Webb Aldrin came back to the house 6 weeks after the wedding. He did not announce himself. He arrived on a Wednesday afternoon when Seline was in the kitchen garden, with her hands in the dirt, and her hair falling out of its pins. And Mrs. Fenwick appeared at the garden gate and said simply, "Mr. Aldrin has come." Seline stood up. She pressed her hands together, pressing the soil off, and she walked to the house. He was in the front hall. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been moving through life by momentum alone, like someone who had pointed himself in a direction some time ago and had not yet found a reason to stop or turn. He was tall, and there was something careful about how he held himself, as if he had learned to take up less space. He looked at the curtains and did not say anything. He looked at the banister, still nothing. Then he looked at her. "Mrs. Aldrin," he said. "Mr. Aldrin," she said, "I'm glad you've come. I have some things I'd like to show you." He had clearly not expected that. She could see him recalibrate, the way you recalibrate when a situation has moved while you were standing still. "All right," he said. She brought him to the study. She did not perform the explanation. She had seen men perform explanations, had watched her father do it, watched the mill accountants do it, this theater of concern and gesturing, and she had always found it unconvincing. She simply showed Webb the accounts. She showed him the change in handwriting. She showed him the maintenance invoices, and the list of 23 items Jonas had confirmed were never completed. "Who authorized this arrangement?" she asked, not confrontationally, as a genuine question. Webb stared at the papers. He picked up the invoice for the east fence. He put it back down. "I did," he said. "I signed the contract. I didn't look at it very carefully." "Did you ever see a receipt for work performed?" A long pause. "No," he said. "Pryor sent quarterly summaries. I didn't read them." Seline nodded. This she had expected. "What I'd like to do," she said, "is terminate the arrangement with Hardcastle and Pryor and recover what we can of the overbilling. I'll need your authorization for correspondence. I can draft the letters, but it needs your name on them." Webb looked at her for a moment, not the way he had looked at the curtains. A different kind of looking. "How long have you been at this?" he asked. "Since the second day," she said. Something moved across his face that she did not have a name for yet. It was not gratitude, or not only that. It was something older and more complicated, the expression of a man who has been underwater for a long time and has just felt his foot touch the bottom. "All right," he said again. She was beginning to understand, a phrase he used when words had run out but agreement remained. "Draft the letters. I'll sign them." Pryor's response to the termination letter was unpleasant. It invoked the original contract, which had a 6-month notice clause. Seline read it and wrote back the same day, pointing out that the clause was void under Massachusetts law if the management party had engaged in fraudulent billing, and that she had documentation of 23 instances of services billed but not rendered, and that she would be happy to continue this correspondence through attorneys if Pryor preferred. Pryor went quiet for 2 weeks. Then he agreed to settle. Webb was in Boston when the settlement came through. Seline sent him a brief note. "Hardcastle and Pryor have agreed to return 14 months of fraudulent billing. I'll apply it to the roof of the east wing and the south pasture fence. The remainder will go back into the household account." Seline, he wrote back. It was the first time she had seen his handwriting in the lighter register. Not the heavy entries from the grief years, but something more like the margin notes, the check the Apple stores. November handwriting, the one that belonged to a person who was still paying attention to the world. "Mrs. Aldrin, I don't know what to say except thank you. That seems inadequate. I'll be at the house next week, if that's convenient for you." He came back the following Thursday. And then he stayed. Not immediately in the way she had imagined, not some sudden transformation. It was gradual. He sat in the study in the evenings, and she sat at the other end of the table, and they worked in parallel, each at their own correspondence. And sometimes one of them would say something about what they were reading, and the other would respond. And slowly, over several weeks, these exchanges became conversations. She learned things. He had loved the house once, fiercely, the way young men love places, before they understand that places can't love you back. He had married his first wife, a woman named Eleanor. She was in the list, but the real Eleanor, his Eleanor, not anyone else's. Here, in the village church, and they had planted the kitchen garden together, and she had kept the accounts in careful fine handwriting, and when she died he had simply evacuated. Signed whatever Pryor put in front of him, stopped reading the margin notes. Let the Apple stores go uninventoried. It seemed disrespectful to care about fences, he said once, not looking up from his letter, when she was the one who cared about them. Seline considered this. "I think," she said slowly, "that caring about the fences is how you keep the things she cared about alive. Not by the grief, by the maintenance." He put down his pen. He looked at her. "I've been thinking about that wrong," he said. "Yes," she said, with enough gentleness that it was not a judgment. The kitchen garden produced its first harvest in late July. Tomatoes and green beans, and more zucchini than any household of 4 people could reasonably consume, which Hattie turned into a series of dishes that appeared at dinner with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose kitchen had been given real material to work with. Webb ate the tomatoes, and said they were good. Seline watched him say it, watched the ordinary pleasure of it, the uncomplicated appreciation for something grown and then eaten, and felt something she had not expected to feel in this house, something that was close to ease. She had not needed the marriage to be a love story. She had needed it to be a working arrangement. But working arrangements, she was discovering, could produce their own warmth, the way a house produces warmth, when enough fires are lit in enough rooms, and the drafts are finally dealt with. She mentioned the zucchini surplus to Jonas, who mentioned it to his cousin in town, and 2 days later, a woman appeared at the kitchen door asking if she could buy some, and Hattie sold her 3. And the next week, there were 2 women, and by August the kitchen garden had become a small, quiet commerce that was not in any household budget Seline had drawn up, but seemed to make everyone involved quietly pleased. She told Webb about it one evening. "You're selling vegetables," he said. "Hattie is. I'm just keeping the accounts." He laughed. It was a short laugh, a little rusty, as if it had not been used in a while, but it was real. The evening that changed things, or clarified them rather, because things had been changing for months without announcement, came in October. Webb had been in Boston again a week this time, and Seline had not noticed until the 3rd day how much she had been listening for his footstep on the stair. Not because she needed him for anything practical, because the house felt differently shaped when he was in it. He came back on a Friday evening. She was in the kitchen garden, which was mostly done for the season, pulling up the last of the bean plants, her hands cold. She heard the carriage and straightened up. He found her there. He stood at the garden gate, still in his traveling coat, and looked at her, at the frost-bitten garden, at the ground she had turned over, at her cold hands. And his expression was the one she had started to recognize, the one that had been appearing more frequently, open in a way that seemed to cost him something. "You didn't have to do all of this," he said. "I know," she said. He stopped. He was not good at direct statement, she had learned. He came at things sideways, the way the light came through the kitchen window in the mornings, indirect but genuinely illuminating. "I mean that you didn't owe this, any of it. The accounts. The garden." He made a small gesture toward the house, which contained, somewhere in its repaired and re-oiled and de-dusted interior, everything she had spent 6 months doing. "You came here because of a contract." "I came here because of a contract," she agreed. "I stayed because it was worth staying for." He was quiet for a moment. The October air was cold and clean and smelled of turned earth and wood smoke from the house. "I'd like to know you better," he said. It was stated plainly, the way he signed letters. No theater, no performance. "If you're amenable." Seline looked at him. She thought about the transaction she had agreed to, and the inventory she had taken on her first day, and the accounts she had found in the unlocked cabinet, and all the things she had learned about this man, by reading what he had stopped being able to do. "I'm amenable," she said. The roofer finished the east wing before the first snow. Webb paid the bill and noted to Seline that it was 30% less than Hardcastle and Pryor had quoted for the same work 3 years ago and never performed. "The key," Seline said, "is to actually negotiate." "I'll remember that," he said. They had dinner together most evenings now. They had developed a kind of shorthand, the way people do when they share a house and start to learn each other's rhythms. She would mention something, and he would already know the context. Or he would begin a thought, and she would finish it, not because they had become identical, but because they had become familiar. And familiarity, she was learning, was its own kind of intimacy. In November, she found a letter in the study that he had left out. Not deliberately, she thought, or maybe deliberately, she could not tell, from his mother. His mother wrote at length about the house, about how it had looked in the early years, about Eleanor, about the way Webb had been before. And then, at the bottom, "I went to the house last week while you were in Boston, and Seline showed me what she'd done with the garden, and with the accounts, and with all of it. She is not what I expected, Webb. She is something better than expected. I hope you are paying attention." Seline set the letter back exactly where she found it. That evening at dinner, she said nothing about it. But she noticed that he was paying attention, in the way he listened when she spoke, in the way he had begun to ask about things she had mentioned in passing, as if he had been keeping a small inventory of his own. In December, Seline received a letter from her father. The mill was doing well. He thanked her, obliquely, for the arrangement, for what it had resolved. She read it and felt something complicated. The old weight of the transaction, the reminder that she had come here to save something for someone else. She set the letter down. She looked around the study, the cabinet of accounts, now organized and current, the garden notes she had started keeping in the margin, order onion sets in February, repair the cold frame, the small list of repairs still on the agenda, the fire that she had learned to build herself because Jonas had taught her, and she had liked learning. She had come here to save her father's mill. But somehow in the course of it she had built something that felt hers. Not in spite of the circumstance but through it. The work had made it real. The attention had made it home. She told Webb about her father's letter one evening. Not all of it, but the part that mattered. That the transaction had been about the mill, that she had known it going in, that she had not pretended otherwise. I know, he said. My father told me. She looked at him. I signed the contract because it made business sense, he said. I want you to know that I'm aware of how that sounds, and that it sounds different to me now than it did in April because of the accounts, she said. Lightly, almost a tease. Because of everything, he said. And he said it plainly enough that she had no way to pretend she had not heard it. She thought of his mother's letter. I hope you are paying attention. I have a question, she said. And you don't have to answer it. All right. Why did you leave? On the wedding day. You shook my hand and walked away. And I understood I wasn't. She stopped. I understood it was not a love match. But I've wondered, since then, what you were thinking when you left. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he might not answer. I was thinking, he said finally, that I was doing you a disservice. That you were 23 years old and you were marrying a man who was hollowed out. And that if I stayed to shake your hand, I might not be able to make myself go, because then I would have to acknowledge what I was asking of you. Seline looked at him. This was not what she had expected. So you went, she said. I went, he said, and I told myself I was giving you space. Which was not entirely untrue. But it was also cowardice. The fire shifted. Somewhere in the house, Hattie was moving around in the kitchen, and the sound of it was homely and ordinary and entirely unlike the silence she had arrived to in April. I've been thinking, Seline said slowly, about what my father said. That transactions can be navigated. And I think he was right. But I also think, she paused, getting it precise. I think that once you've navigated a thing well enough, it stops being a transaction. It becomes something else. What does it become? He asked. She looked at the margin notes she had started keeping in the account book. Order onion sets in February. Repair the cold frame. Ask Jonas about the south pasture drainage. I don't know yet, she said, but I think we'll find out. She wrote in the account book that night before bed, not numbers. Just the date and a note. East wing roof holding, no leaks reported. Garden ready for winter. Household accounts current and correct. Harcastle and Pryor, closed. And then, below that, in the small margin handwriting, that she had unconsciously adopted from the earlier years of the ledger. From the person who had cared about the fences, and the apple stores, and the cold frame. Good year. Better than expected.